Hey people, this is Dr. Jess along with Paul Burgess, the great and powerful. And this is another installment of our podcast, Why Are You Sick? And this week, I prefaced this particular podcast by sending out a little Instagram and on Facebook and so forth, if you've been to see many specialists and you're still ill, why would that be? Because people think it's in your head. And in this particular installment, I think we'd like to answer that question. What do you think, Paul?
Absolutely. I think, it's so difficult, right? Because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings and we don't want to kind of skew people's view on someone that spent years studying a specific kind of area and all that kind of thing.
We're actually honoring that, not
Yeah.
disparaging that. There's something that goes along with being a specialist that is an unintended result, an unintended side effect, if you will. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think from my perspective, there's a few things. Firstly, if you're a specialist in something, you tend to specialize in it. And that can, in and of itself, narrow your focus, which means anything outside of that doesn't always get thought about or accounted for, or so no, that's got nothing to do with it. It's this that we need to look at. And sadly, that is normally, things outside of what they're looking at are discounted because they don't understand it, because it's not their specialist subject. And specialists will feel as though they have to be looking at the specialist stuff and be very good at it, because that's what I am. I'm a specialist.
Right.
And so these other confounding factors that can be very relevant and extremely beneficial tend to get overlooked. And then we've got the other issue about physicians that hold licenses can only practice within their license. And that means they're restricted from certain things. Certainly in the UK, doctors and GPs are very much controlled by the medical board and allowed to do certain things and not allowed to do other things. And they worry massively about, are they crossing a line? And they will protect their license as, to the end of their career, because they don't want to lose it. And if that means they will not enter into functional medicine, or they won't enter into other areas that could be really useful, then they will just ignore it and say, nope, that's not something we do. We don't get involved with that. We only do this. And therefore you're missing that complete picture, in my opinion.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Let me give you a very quick history. Pre-1960, we had the GP, the general practitioner, who was the coordinator of care. And the GP is somebody who knew a lot about a lot of things and would refer to a specialist when a particular thing, whatever it happens to be, needed to be checked. Now, the specialist would barely talk to you and would say, I'll call your doctor, and will call your doctor and say, this is what I found, this is what I propose to do. And your GP would call you in and say, okay, this is what's going on, and this is what I recommend we do. Why? Because your GP is a person who took care of your family, knew you from birth. There was that kind of GP. So you trusted that individual. In my case, it was a Dr. Siegel, who knew everything about everything. And if he sent you off to a specialist, they reported to him. Now, in 1970s, there was a shift in medicine that people wanted to be specialists. And the GP became ostracized as being a lesser physician. It was a complete opposite. And people went into specialties, not a bad idea. They went into specialties, they studied their particular portion of the body. They did it very, very well. But instead of someone who sees the whole picture referring to someone because they needed that specialty, they needed consideration by somebody who was an uber expert, you have all these uber experts who are very, very, very learned in their particular area. And They don't talk to each other. They do their thing, recommend their thing within their area. And the result of that is that people are being treated for symptoms or areas of their body. And how many people out there are taking medicines upon medicines that are being prescribed by several different specialists, and never the twain shall meet, and they're having medication reactions. This is not a reflection on the doctors, by the way. The doctors are doing their job, but you don't go to a gynecologist and expect the services of an endocrinologist. You don't go to an orthopedist and expect the services of another specialty. You go to them because you want their expertise in their particular area. But the end result of this has been the following. The onus of diagnosis and what to do is no longer on the doctor, it's on the patient themselves. They're the ones who are figuring out where they should go, who they should see. In other words, the person least trained to do it. What we lack are a specialist who looks at kind of everything. Think about Dr. House, MD. Think about Sherlock Holmes, somebody who looks at the big picture. Specialists have been disparaged by saying, all you think about is one thing. You're a line specialist. So if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, just like you said, Paul, they work within certain parameters and they're very closely watched. And these doctors don't want to get struck. I don't blame them. Think about it. 4 years of 4 years of medical, 4 years of college, a year of transitional internship, 3 to 9 years of residency, depending on your specialty. You get out, you finally get work, you have a family, you have a house. This is your only source of income. And they have you by, I won't be impolite, they have you by the horns, and if you make a mistake or you do something that the higher ups don't want you to do and you get struck, how are you supposed to feed your family?
Yeah, but also that's, a decade or more of study and work that's gone out the window that you're not able to use anymore. So
exactly.
and you're right. Trouble is people go to what they believe are the best place. They don't get the answer they're after. It can't be worked out, and then they're told it's all in your head. The scans are fine, the blood tests are fine, it can't be anything wrong. We think you might need to see a psychiatrist or here's some Prozac. But the problem is still there, and that's kind of when they turn up to us, right? Because they're looking for a third opinion on something that they've not been able to find, which is
70th.
yeah, right. But the good thing is that we were very often able to turn around and say, okay, have you looked at this, and this in your particular case? And they went, no one's ever mentioned it. Yeah, great, let's have a look. Let's see, because we've seen it before. We know what can contribute to that, and then all of a sudden we can get really quite exceptional improvements in people that have been told there's nothing you can do.
It's interesting that you mentioned, you said the scans are okay, the labs are okay, there must be nothing wrong with you. A permutation of being a specialist and being watched over, usually by big pharma that has contributed to, and then insurance carriers, the unintended or intended result was you have to show something on a lab test before it's considered true. In the before time, if you went to your doctor and you have to wear a jumper in 41-degree heat, okay, and your hair's falling out and you're gaining weight for no reason, obviously signs of hypothyroidism, and you handed that doctor a test, paper with tests on it that said you have a normal thyroid, that doctor would look at it at that time saying, well, I'll use this for toilet paper later, okay, and start treating you for hypothyroidism. But the fact is, you're walking with the same symptoms, which also can have neuropsychiatric expressions and all kinds of other things, fibromyalgia, ME, CFS, and all kinds of other stuff that are attributable to hypothyroidism, and have a normal test, and they will simply look at you and say, there's nothing wrong with your thyroid, okay, because they're stuck. They won't treat speculatively. So even if you have every sign of, and I'm just using hypothyroidism as an example, every sign of it, and if they prescribe something for it, they put their license in danger because they can't prove it on a lab test. Whereas when somebody works with us, we tend to look at patterns. Okay. And you know that I mentor a lot of practitioners, and I'm always whipping them to look at the patterns. Take the symptoms that the patient gives you, look at the lab test, look at the patterns, because that will tell you more than the single static lab test.
Yeah.
But remember that the specialists, as good as they are at what they do, are not free to be doctors anymore. They're not free to do it. They're not free to.
Here's a quick thing on that thyroid. This morning I did a iodine patch test because I had some bloods done recently, and whilst they were all in the normal range, they weren't in our optimal range.
Right.
And I wanted to find out what was going on there, right? And there's no way a doctor is going to throw some iodine on your arm and just like monitor it and just see when it disappears.
Right. And believe it at all, right?
Correct, right? But yeah, and I actually think it means something. But I've done this patch test, and I did it at 6:30 this morning, and it's now 3 o'clock coming up to in the afternoon, and it's completely disappeared. And it probably disappeared actually about an hour ago. So it kind of showing that there's probably a good understanding that some iodine needed, and that's why the numbers, even though in the normal doctor's range, I was looking at them going, that's not good enough. It needs to be more optimal. What's the thing that's missing? And so testing for iodine and being able to say, okay, that's what the problem is. I need to actually take some, right? Because it looks like there's a low deficiency there or something like that. That's not something that you're ever going to get from a specialist or a doctor, because you're in the normal range.
Right, exactly.
So even the data they're looking at is measured differently.
And think about it. You have a whole set of tests that are within the normal standard ranges, not optimal ranges, because we can argue about that. Okay, everything's in an optimal range. You have a bunch of symptoms that become now unexplainable, and they will fob you off with a diagnosis like fibromyalgia or ME or something like that, offer you whatever the available medications are. And if you continue not to be better, they'll fob you off to a psychiatrist. Okay, because this is a sad thing, and they should be ashamed of this. Okay, because essentially, if I can't figure it out, it must be you. Not if I can't figure it out, I better look deeper. If I can't figure it out, it must be you. And that's ubiquitous in the medical profession today. So the answer to the question of you've been to one specialist after another, and you still have no answers and you're still ill. The answer to that question is you've not seen the correct specialist. What specialist should you look for? Somebody who specializes in looking at the big picture, who will consider the belief systems, the internal environment, external environment, has the expertise and the experience to put all the puzzle pieces together, and more than that, is willing to do the work to figure out what's happening, as long as you're willing to do the work to get better. This is the kind of work Paul and I do. And you see our websites on the screen, and we both offer 30-minute, I call them meet and greet sessions, so that we can ascertain if we can help you, and you can ascertain if you really want to work with us. But no matter who you choose to work with, if you've been in that situation, don't blame the specialist. Okay, remember, they're doing their job within their field. The fact is, you need somebody who's going to look at the bigger picture. That's what's really necessary, and that's what's lacking almost ubiquitously throughout the world.
Yeah. And
to look at that big picture.
We've said it before, in that we think this stuff's basic and we think it's easy or simple or whatever it is. None of it is basic or simple or easy. It's just because we do it all the time, every day, that we're so used to it. Whereas, I'll give you a really very quick example, because I know it's running on a bit, but there was a post on social media the other day that said, if you eat a banana, you're going to get a big high spike in glucose, and it's bad because you need to keep your glucose under control. So here's what you should do. You eat the banana with peanut butter, and what will then happen is you'll get a lower spike, which is correct.
Yeah, it is.
The trouble is you get a lower spike for a longer period of time, which they didn't say because they weren't aware of it. So in actual fact, it might be lower insulin, but because it's over a longer period of time, your cells are exposed to it for longer at an elevated level. Therefore, it's actually more detrimental, first thing. Second thing, you mix carbohydrate and fat together, banana and peanut butter, very easy to overeat, right? Because you've got that fat sugar combo, which is what junk food's based on. So from a just an appetite control perspective, it's probably not a great thing. And thirdly, if you want to manage your blood glucose, you don't put fat with carbohydrate, you put fiber with it. And that will deal with everything, including the cholesterol that you're going to generate by having the high amounts of blood glucose knocking around. So, but this is not, you know, to me, that's like so obvious and second nature. And I posted on there, I made a comment on that post. The tirade of things that I got of people asking me, well, what about this and what about that? And how do we do that? And well, where's that from? And I was like, well, you know what? I didn't come here to educate everyone on this. I just wanted to say, look, this post, some of it is old information and it's not up to date. That person had like 50,000 followers that were all very happy to take on that information because it's that basic stuff that is old news. But we look at it and go, well, that's not actually true. It doesn't work like that. And so you've got to be really careful what you follow and what you listen to and what goes on, because a lot of people are just picking up from other people and regurgitating.
Right. It's like when you're reading articles, you're reading that author's opinion of articles. You actually have to go back to the articles and see if the author is referencing the articles or is it a personal opinion. There's too much to think about. There really is. And when we say something simple, it may be simple to us, but doesn't equate to easy. Okay. But think about it. If you've been in this stead where you're still ill after, you know, innumerable consultations with different specialists, lots of different treatments, and you're still ill, guess what? You need someone who's going to put those puzzle pieces together, who's going to consider everything, not judge you, not presuppose that it's in your head, because that's the last thing we think about, okay? It's the first thing. We don't sit there and say, you know, oh, it's in their head. We sit there and say, gee, I wonder why that happened. Okay, I wonder why this. If that whole diabetic or blood sugar problem is there, we have to sit there and say, why do we have insulin resistance? What's causing that kind of inflammation, and work our way backwards? Okay, we do it all the time, okay, which is why we're good at it, which is why we teach it to other doctors. Okay, but that's what needs to be done. You need to find somebody who will look at the big picture. And we could go through another half hour of the parameters of the type of practitioner you need, but I think that's kind of all for this week. Okay, we'll catch you guys again next week. Thanks a lot, Paul. Always a pleasure chatting, man.
Pleasure, mate. See you soon.
Take care.